For decades, people were told to get educated and move into knowledge work. That was the path away from physical labor and onto higher levels of the economy. But AI is now changing that higher layer. If corporations own the systems that do all of the thinking, power moves away from millions of skilled workers, and when capable people lose their place in society, that's exactly how revolutions start. So the middle class is important because these are your competent people in society who are not elite, who are not the government, who are not corporations, but they're smart enough to climb up the hierarchy of society. Think about what AI is actually doing. Like in the short run, what AI is going to do is going to replace the repetitive parts of knowledge work. The less white collar jobs where you're in the rooms, the less power the rest of us have. There's only one thing left: destitution or revolution. Hey, what's going on, everybody? My name is Eric Shabazz. I'm 39 years old and I've been affected by this AI revolution. I've basically went to school. I had a degree. I worked in energy, banking, tech, customer service, the whole 9 yards. And right now I'm unemployed. And I'm not sure I even want to go back into the job market in general. And I'm just been spending all my time trying to figure out what this new world that we're moving into means, not only for myself, but for all of society. And so one of the things that I want to discuss today is you already hear about AI's coming. You know how it's going to kind of take all middle class jobs and coming for cognition. You already know that story, but I want to give you a different perspective on what this means for your life and what's to come based on the structural change that this AI or industrial revolution or cognitive revolution is bringing. And what thing I want to talk about is the knowledge worker, because the knowledge worker, or what they call the middle class, is very important to keeping the fabric of society stable based on the world we've been living in for the last 50, 70, 100 years. So just to get into it, when you talk about knowledge work, what does that mean? So I'm going to give you a perspective for you can kind of see it in this entire architectural system to understand it better. So why does this AI revolution matters, and why does the knowledge work matter, and why if they take away knowledge work, they could end up in a revolution, or it could end up in a situation where a small people, firms and corporations own the entire society. So here's the deal. Traditionally, knowledge work was a result of a elevation away from basic physical labor. So if you know how, as we evolved, we used to be hunters and gatherers, and then we had agriculture. And once we had agriculture, we were able to basically stabilize and stay in one place, and we built institutions, so on and so forth. Fast forward, we're in 2026. What does that mean? Well, let's keep it simple. If you didn't go to college, then most likely you're probably going to do some type of physical level or customer service level job. And that's not considered knowledge work, at least in the modern age, right? So you work at UPS, you go work at Amazon warehouse, you're picking up boxes, you're moving things, you're driving trucks, you're working at McDonald's, you're physically, bagging burgers, right? That's not knowledge work. But the manager who managed them are doing knowledge work. If you work at McDonald's and somebody buy a Coke and the driver drives to McDonald's and refill the Coke, then he is in kind of physical labor, general labor job. And the person who went to college who don't want to do those jobs can end up in Coca-Cola's corporate office where he's tracking all the delivery drivers and what they're doing in spreadsheets and doing analysis and reporting it to the executive team. So what does that mean? That means that the way the economy was organized prior to this AI revolution that's coming is you're either doing physical labor or you can educate yourself, usually by going to college or getting a specialized skill, and you can manage that physical labor, right? And so that's what knowledge workers are. What knowledge work represented for society was a upward mobility ladder. Why is this important? Because I'm going to get into this later, but I want you to understand why knowledge workers matter. Because knowledge workers are the people who are educated, and they're usually more capable of navigating the hierarchy in society. So if you're a young kid that worked at McDonald's, but you were relatively smart, you quickly realize you don't want to do that forever. So you start going to school while you work for McDonald's. You're acquiring knowledge, you're self-motivated, and about time you're done with your 4 years of college, you're able to get a corporate job. Well, now you're not working for $10 an hour. You're eventually making 50. And if you stay for 5 or 6 years, you can make $80,000. If you make it a career, you can end up a manager making $150,000. Or if you even gain more experience, you can go out on your own and start your own business. And if you're really, really, really lucky, you can become an elite investor and be worth $1 billion. So what did you just see there? You saw a person who started off doing physical labor, using his knowledge, his mind, to have upward mobility. But what allowed him to have that upward mobility? It was his intellect, his mind, and his ability to provide value beyond his physical hands to a corporation that gave him a job, which gave him more money, which produced more opportunity, because not only does he see how the system works, he's gaining more knowledge, he has more expendable income, he's able to invest in additional education, and he can go out and start his own business, and he can end up a millionaire or even a billionaire. And as a result, he could end up in government and he could end up in the power structure. So the middle class is important because these are your competent people in society who are not elite, who are not the government, who are not corporations, but they're smart enough to climb up the hierarchy of society. And white collar work, or what you call knowledge work, represents all those people. Now, why is this important? Because middle class people, and I'm not really talking about middle class in the sense that I'm not talking about class. I'm talking about anybody who uses their mind and able to navigate themselves in society. I'm not saying people who work at Amazon or doing physical labor is not intelligent, and many of them can make great careers. I'm just using this as an example to explain to you that knowledge work represents much more than the type of work you do. It represents a class of people in society that have certain competencies and competitive advantages where they can climb up the power hierarchy. Why does this matter? Well, there's 3 stratas in society currently. There's kind of the government, corporation, and the elite. They're kind of controlling society. They make the biggest decisions. They control the majority of the wealth, and they kind of set the rules of the game. Then there's the middle management. This is your knowledge workers who are the buffer between the people who control society and everybody else, the millions of people every day that work. And so the middle layer is the most important layer when it comes to your relationship with the power structure. Why? Because the middle class are the closest to the power structure. That means that if the manager or the CEO owns the company, the middle class person is working in the corporate office with them. He directly communicates with this powerful person. And that powerful person need you, the middle class worker, to manage the masses. For instance, if you work at Coca-Cola, let's look at Coca-Cola, and you're a middle class working in the corporate office. The CEO wants to make changes that may not be good for the millions of workers that work at the Coca-Cola plant. The middle class person who's at the office has the biggest opportunity to influence what that CEO does. And that's an analogy for all the knowledge workers in society. Not only are they middle class people who have somewhat education, they represent a certain power structure and a proximity to government, to corporations, to billionaires, to elite. The elite need them to manage their system. See, the elite, the corporations, the governments do not do all the work. Their managers do all of the physical managing, and the managers manage you, the masses who are at the warehouses, basically packing and delivering all the coats all over the world, right? That's just an analogy. And so you need to understand the role of the middle class worker in order to understand how society is going to transform if AI end up reducing knowledge workers. Because now, instead of a corporation representing, let's say corporation, government, let's say they represent 65% of all the power. And then the knowledge worker, who basically is the manager of the corporation and government, represent a significant portion of power. And then lastly, you have your masses who have the least amount of power. Well, the person who has the biggest opportunity to advocate for you is the middle class person if he doesn't sell out the masses. And that the person that the elite needs in order to manage the masses, where they won't turn on them and stop buying their product or stop listening to their laws, they use the middle class worker who has the biggest incentive to basically continue to work with the elite, right? Because the middle class person is getting a relatively good life compared to the masses. He's not in the warehouse working for $10 or $15 an hour. He's making $50 or $60 or $70 an hour. And so he has an incentive to keep the system going because he gets to be slightly better than you. But his life is not so good that he's disconnected away from what the elite are doing. There's a point where the elite can do something that's so disruptive that even the middle class knowledge worker will have a problem with the elite and revolt against him. So the middle class is the most dangerous of the elite to the elite because he's the closest to the elite, and the elite needs him in order for the middle class worker can manage everybody else. Okay. So that's why it's important. Now I'm going to explain how that's directly connected to how this AI revolution could change that entire structure, and then society can be potentially be deconstructed, destabilized. And it's very important for us to understand why. All right. So the reason why this is important is because, as I said, think about what AI is actually doing. Like in the short run, what AI is going to do is going to replace the repetitive parts of knowledge work. So right now, if you think about how the economy works, if you went to college, you probably know what I mean. The majority of the college level roles is what I call generalized analyst roles. What does that mean? That means they're using human intelligence to interpret information in multiple computer systems and have you do work. For instance, somebody will email the company, you would read the email, you would understand what they want, and you would respond to them. Before AI, they didn't really have intelligent systems that could do that efficiently. Now that they do, they can replace that. Secondly, there's something called distributed systems. If you have a college level job, essentially what you would do is you would get a request. It could be somebody emailing. It could be something you read in an article or a document. And once you understood what they wanted, you would go put information in a different system. They didn't have software that could understand that. So they would hire what they call knowledge workers or white collar workers who work in the office to do that. So you would read a spreadsheet, understand the numbers, look at an email. Somebody's requesting something. You would look at those two things. As a result, a decision needs to be made and you execute it. You either call somebody, you submit a form, or you put something into a software system. Well, they didn't have intelligent AI systems or computer systems that can do that efficiently. So they needed you, the knowledge worker that they pay $50,000 a year. Okay. That's what's changed. They don't need you for that anymore. The technology is getting to a point where most of the way they run their business, the things that you were doing that are basic like that, which is the majority of college jobs, they can replace you. Now, this is very important for you to understand why this is a problem. Because I just told you being a knowledge worker wasn't just a job or class. It was a actual power center in society. If you're educated, you have more money. If you have more money, you have more expendable income. If you keep up with politics, you're more likely to keep up with politics. You're more likely to vote. You're more likely to invest. You're more likely to understand where to put your money. You're more likely to decide what money you put in the stock market. You're more likely to know how the system works so you can change it. You're more likely to start a business. So all of these people in the middle class represent a potential threat or ally to the people in power. If you want to unseat a senator, the more educated you are, the more likely you're going to be capable of doing it. If you want to start a business to disrupt or compete against an institution that you think is unfair, if you're educated, have expendable income, worked at a corporation before, got experience, you're more likely to be capable of doing it. And so if AI replaced a whole bunch of these jobs of these knowledge workers and they're not employed, that's less capable people to compete against the dominant society. You see, knowledge work is just a proxy word for a certain class of person and their competencies and their ambition and their ability to climb up the social hierarchy. And so if it compresses the amount of people like that and they're not working, right, and we'll talk about this later, those people don't just go away. These are smart people who studied for 5 years, went to college, got master's degrees, that worked hard, that found a way to compete in society and get the best job. These are smart, tactful people who end up, a lot of times, becoming the elite. They end up in the government. They end up opening their own businesses. And so if they compress the amount of these people, that means that power goes somewhere. So if these people are not working, they don't have income, they're not involved in the corporation's thinking process, then that's less people preventing the government and the corporation and the elite from controlling the power systems and structuring society in a way that's unfair. Remember I told you that the middle layer is the kind of the broker between the elite, that's the government, and the corporation, and the masses. So you have less representatives who are in the inside when they start consolidating these jobs. So when they remove a significant proportion of the knowledge workers and they're just as unemployed as you, the masses, then that means that power went somewhere else. That power was absorbed by the corporation. That power was absorbed by the government. And this is why the AI revolution matters. Not just because of jobs. It's because the type of people who were in these jobs will be less economically, socially, status-wise viable. And as a result of that, the corporations have more power to dictate your life. But there's something else that's even more scary. These same capable people don't just disappear. They're going to be distraught, and they're capable. They'll be motivated, and they're going to galvanize society. So if they don't figure out how to make this AI transition work where people still end up with jobs, and not just any job, these knowledge workers, these middle class workers, these kids who went to college, these guys who worked hard to have a future in America don't just want any job. They want a job that is up to standards to how they see themselves, that gives the right prestige and status that they believe they deserve because they believe they are valuable human beings. These people do not just go away. I want to give you an example before I get into the final part. Is people heard about the Arab Springs, right? This was kind of a political revolution. People heard about the revolution that happened in China. Do you realize that the majority of these revolutions were by college age kids who are educated, who worked hard, who's intelligent, who knew what society was and where it was going, and they saw ahead of time where their future was. And as a result, if they saw that future as a bleak future, they acted. This is the same thing that's going to happen in the AI revolution if AI does not deliver more prosperity for everybody. If it ends up reducing the amount of knowledge workers, these are middle class people with upward mobility, it's going to basically shun the very people who are most capable of starting a revolution against the government, starting a revolution against the corporations, uphealing society, right? And so don't get me wrong. When I talk about the middle class, the masses, the laborers, whoever you want to call them, the working poor, they're just as important. I'm not putting them off. It's just for the purposes of this video, I want people to look beyond AI taking your job. There's a structural power shift in knowledge work. Knowledge work represents, we get middle class people who are close to poor people, who are close to rich people. We get to be part of the decision making. We are the boundary between the elite and the working poor. And it gave the working poor a reason to work hard because there was a ladder, the story of America. And when you remove that ladder story, you have a disproportionate dystopia in America. Because if you're, like I gave you the example, if you're just a normal laborer, you knew working at FedEx that if you were willing to work hard, go to college, that in 5, 6, 7 years, you can move up to knowledge work. And when you're in that knowledge work, you knew using those skills from knowledge work and the income you earn that you can move into government, you can move into owning your own business, you can move into the stock market, you could even become a billionaire if you were smart enough. And by compressing that middle layer, as either you're poor or you're rich and you're elite, then there is no mobility story for people to be inspired and willing to work for, to willing to continue to follow the laws for, to willing to be a citizen who follows the system for. There's only one thing left: destitution or revolution. And this is what you should be paying attention to as all this play out. Are they creating legitimate opportunities with these AI revolutions? By compressing knowledge work, is there a new form of middle class that's going to be available for the working poor? Because if they're not, that means two things simultaneously. That means that all of that power that those middle class workers once had has been moved into the elite. Now you have Elon worth $1 trillion. More money than several of the largest countries in the world. So this is where the essential problem lies. Lastly, let's talk about the corporations and the government. I consider them the elite. So whether you're a trillionaire, a billionaire, you own a large corporation, or you're the government, I consider them the elite system. And whether it ends up being the corporation or if it ends up being the government working with the corporation or elitist people who control these AI systems, they're all one and the same. I consider them the elite system structure. Then there's the middle class. Then there's the working poor, will represent the largest masses. And if you see it, there's a structural hierarchy. There's the masses, which represent the majority of people. Then there's a smaller amount of people called the middle class, the competent knowledge workers who manage the system. And there's the even smaller class called the government, the elite, and the billionaires. And if they're able to remove that knowledge work or a significant portion of it, then the amount of people who are connected to both the elite and the poor is smaller, which means that the masses have less power and the elite get more. And the problem is cognition was the basis of you climbing up this system. You have to understand, like from a first principle perspective, what we essentially did was went from physical to mental to system level. Okay. How much work can you do with your physical body? How much work can you manage with your physical mind as an individual? And then if you're an entrepreneur or government, what type of systems can you create to manage it all? And their system is expanding to encapsulate what the individual person can contribute, where you're being absorbed as the knowledge worker into what the management system does. But as a result, power is being absorbed. The less white collar jobs where you're in the rooms, the less power the rest of us have, because you are still connected to the poor enough to care. And you also have shown to be some of the most capable, because if you started out poor and you're able to work your way to the middle class, got yourself educated, you're a capable person. And a capable person who still has his morals intact or capable of combating the government, combating corporation, combating the elite. And so if these people end up disenfranchised, this is the part that even the elite, the government needs to worry about. And the smart people in AI are. That's why you hear them talking about universal basic income. They understand, people who study history, that very capable, young, disenfranchised, educated people cause problems. They know how to organize. They know how to plan. They know how to delay gratification. All the skills they needed to climb up, go to school, get educated, start a business, work their way up to the elite, they can use against the elite. And so what you need to pay attention to, what we all need to pay attention to, is how they're using these AI systems. Are they creating new middle class level jobs? Will gives everybody a ladder to aspire for? Or are they just absorbing everything and then taking all the power? Because if they do, understand these middle class knowledge workers are not going to take it sitting down. There will most definitely be some type of revolution. And I think that that's the most important thing to understand. So what does all this mean? What this means is this is a transformational structural time. This is no different than everybody going from riding horses to riding cars. Everybody from working in factories to working in offices. Now you're going to go from working into offices into systems managing us all. And we don't know what that world looks like, and we don't know how we fit into it, but you still understand one thing, that in order to understand why it matters to you, you need to understand where power emanates, where power moves, and where it's ultimately going. I hope this was helpful. Thanks.